What's up, it's Phil from Phil Exposed. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about one of the most underrated topics in the fitness industry. And in this topic alone, it's going to help you reach your genetic potential a lot faster, and it's going to help you save a laundry list of injuries. So I'm basically going to be talking about grinders in today's episode, because grinders, not many YouTubers talk about it, but they're very apparent and evident in a lot of training clips out there. So if you type in 500-pound deadlift, you type in certain compound lifts using a barbell, you're going to see a lot of lifts online of people grinding out reps. And they do this because of ego-related purposes. They want to lift more for social media or just for YouTube. And if you guys are curious as to what grinders are, it's basically a repetition that's done in an extremely slow manner where the form just basically gets thrown out the window. So you're basically just getting the weight from point A to point B. You don't really care about technique. And that's just that. So in this episode, I'm going to show you guys 4 reasons as to why I dislike grinders. And hopefully by the end of this episode, you're going to understand my point of view and you're going to minimize the grinders in your training as well. Okay, so before I get into 4 things I don't like about grinders, let me talk about what I recommend instead. So I'm a huge advocate and a big believer in training with sub-max loads and also training until technical failure. So if you don't know what these 2 terms mean, they're very straightforward. Training with sub-max loads basically means that you stop 1 or 2 reps shy of failure. So you're leaving a bit of reps in the tank, and this is going to keep all the reps cleaner, fresher, and it'll allow you to do more sets without compromising your technique. So if your 7 rep max is 500 pounds, you're basically going to do 500 pounds for maybe 5 reps, maybe 6 reps, but you're not going to touch the 7th rep because you don't want to compromise the technique. You don't want to have too many grinders in your training. Now, as far as technical failure is concerned, it's pretty similar to sub-max loads, but you're training until the technique is no longer good. So once your technique is compromised, you basically stop the set. So if you're doing a 5 rep max, it's probably going to be like your first rep is going to be relatively fast, and then the 5th rep is going to be somewhat slow, but the technique is still going to be on point. So it's just that the first rep is going to be faster than the last one. That's it. Okay, so the first reason as to why I don't like grinders is because the injury rate skyrockets. So this is pretty self-explanatory, but obviously if you're constantly getting injured in a given muscle group, it's going to be harder for you to progress from session to session. So you're going to be forced to take more deloads, and it's going to be a slower ride altogether. Whereas if you put your ego to the side and you train with more of a sub-max approach, like I was saying, you'd have cleaner reps, you'd have better technique, and from week to week it'd be easier to progress. Okay, so the second reason as to why I don't like grinders, this is very similar to the first reason. It makes your recovery go to shit. So take an example of a guy who's doing an intensity day. He's doing 3 sets of 3 on a squat, and the first 2 sets go well, but then the 3rd set he's completely gassed, and all 3 reps are pretty much grinders. What's going to happen, especially if he's an intermediate or advanced lifter, is that 1 set alone could potentially compromise his whole week and probably even the week after that, because let's say if you're squatting, 5 plates, 5.5 plates, it's really hard to recover from that, especially if you rounded your back for 3 reps and it was the big grinders, it could potentially even cripple you. So the smart approach to do is, like I said before, use more sub-max loads, train a technical failure, and you're really going to minimize the injury risks. Okay, so the third reason as to why I don't like grinders, and this is probably the most important part of the list, is that it teaches you suboptimal movement patterns and it teaches you bad habits. So a good example of this is when I used to play basketball. I had a coach who would make me shoot hundreds of jump shots every single week, and every shot would look very identical, and every now and then we'd make slight tweaks to the technique, but for the most part every shot looked exactly the same. Now the same thing could be applied into weightlifting. Every single repetition that you do should be looking exactly the same, whether it's a warm-up set or a heavy set. But on the other hand, if you do a lot of grinders in your training, you're teaching yourself the wrong movement patterns, and you're doing grinders, which like I said before, their injury risks are going to go up and your recovery is going to go to shit. So if your recovery goes to shit, that means that you won't be able to do the movement as often because you're going to be more taxed. So you won't be able to practice as often, you won't be as fluent with the movement, and you're just forced to dumb down the frequency even more. In other words, you're not going to be very fluent with the movement because you're not going to be doing it super often because you're always going to be so taxed. And when you actually do the movement, you're just doing these ugly grinders, so you're not getting the right kind of practice in. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier with the suboptimal movement patterns, you're basically going to create a bit more sticking points in your training if you follow this grinding approach week in and week out. So if you were to take something like a bench press where you unrack the weight, you lower it to your chest, and then you push it back up with the concentric, that's how it's supposed to look. But if you're following more of a grinding approach, you're going to unrack the weight, you're going to lower it to your chest, and then it's going to be a real grinder. So you're going to press it, it's probably going to come more up on one side, and then you're going to have to balance it out on the other side, and it's just going to be a slow grinder overall. So if you're doing that week in and week out, you're just teaching yourself how to do grinders. Whereas if you follow my approach before, where you're doing sub-max loads, it's just going to be a more consistent range of motion throughout the whole movement, and that's what you want to practice. You want to make the bar still move as fast as possible while using respectable weights. Okay, so the fourth thing that I'm not too crazy about with grinders is that it makes it almost impossible for you to progress the next week. So obviously if you hit some crazy grinder where you really had to psych yourself up and the lift was really slow, you may have gotten the lift, but it could potentially jeopardize your sessions for the next week, because it's going to be very hard to progress from that, because you're going to have to replicate it by psyching up even more, and it's just not the right approach to take. So in my opinion, you want to use more sub-max loads, leave a bit more in the tank, and then hopefully, and most likely by the next session next week, you'll be able to use a bit more weight or get a bit more reps. Okay, so I just addressed 4 reasons why I don't like grinders, but now I'm going to address the most commonly asked question, which is, when should I grind if I am going to grind? And the answer to this is really debatable, and it's not mandatory by any means to ever grind. With that being said, let's say if you're in a powerlifting competition or just some strength sport in general, then you may have to grind in certain cases if you want to win, because sometimes it's kind of like a life or death type of thing, where it's like if you don't grind, your total's not going to be high enough, and you may need to grind out just to crank out those extra numbers. So it's really all on you, and just know that's not mandatory. But if you want to take it to the next level, sometimes you may have to grind, but I wouldn't make it too excessive, or I wouldn't make it too much of a habit, because it's not the best habit to get into in the first place. Okay, so there you guys have it. These are 4 reasons as to why I'm not a huge advocate of grinding. So let me know what you thought about this video, and more importantly, let me know in the comment section below if you're for grinding or not. So if you're for grinding and you like slow, sloppy reps and you feel like you're making progress off it, and let me know in the comment section below. Whereas if you're anti-grinding and you like sub-max reps and training till technical failure like I mentioned earlier, then let me know. Okay, so also on a side note, I just want to mention that there are some trainees and some lifters out there who do advocate grinding and who have seen a lot of great success with it. So a good example of this would be Eric Bugenhagen. He incorporates a lot of grinders into his training, but keep in mind that he also does have good genetics, good leverages for certain lifts, and he has a lot of full body awareness that he developed over years and years of training. So I'm not going to advocate grinding to the majority of the population, but there are some people who may be able to get away with it for certain movements as far as now is concerned. So also want to say that when I start uploading my own training footage, you're not going to see some crazy Phil who's just grinding out ugly reps, because that's not the kind of training that I want to promote. So if you want to look at some crazy grinders and slow, sloppy reps, you could click away. This isn't the channel where you're going to find it. You're going to find some consistent, good, hard work, but it's not going to be super sloppy. So just keep that in mind. Hope you guys liked the video, and I'll see you guys next time.